Well, we're back working on the bridge over the River Wye. Of course, we finished the bridge a while back. What we're working on today is the pond under the bridge, the actual River Wye, which isn't a river, it's a pond. When you're building a model railroad, a lot of times you have to sort of compress things. So in my mind, it's something of a river, but in reality, it's this kind of pond under the bridge. The goal, of course, is to have fun building it and just make it look good, make it look like something that you want it to look like. So my goal from the outset was to actually have water under here, but any kind of water features that you have on an outdoor railroad can just turn into no end of maintenance grief. So it seems that the best way to have a water feature is just to have something that you can put water in when you need to or want to, and then just have a drain to drain the water out, or just let it drain out of its own accord, and have it dry most of the time, just empty most of the time. But when you want to fill it with water, you can. Now, as I mentioned, there's no room here for an actual river, and there's a track right next to the bridge on the lower level, and I didn't want to put another bridge there and a river that goes down under all of the bridges and so on. So my original thinking was just have kind of a berm here, a watertight berm that will keep the water from flowing out onto the rest of the railroad, so I can just dump a couple of cups of water in there and have water when I want to. For our metric speaking friends, that's about half a liter. Anyway, the entire railroad has to be watertight, of course, because it's outdoors. And it's going to get rained on, and it has to stand up to the elements. So having a water feature isn't as unusual as it might be when you're indoors, because, like I said, this whole area has to be waterproof anyway. Especially this time of year, because, we're experiencing that thing that they call monsoon season. So I'm not sure which is harder on the railroad, rain, snow, or 110 degrees summer temperatures, but everything has to be weatherproof, and in this particular case, waterproof, so that it isn't destroyed by the rain. So everything out here is made out of cement, and everything's been sealed so that it's truly waterproof, or at least very water resistant. So, of course, from time to time, the pond will fill itself up, and everything else will be sort of wet. I don't mind running the railroad when it's wet, and it doesn't seem to bother it. I've driven the locomotives right through a huge puddle of standing water. I don't run it when it's actually raining out here because, well, I don't want to get the trains actually wet and all covered with water spots. Moreover, what's the fun of running trains in the middle of a rainstorm? Now, one of the products I'm using here on the pond is this river rock, I guess you could call it. We found this at Walmart in the plant department, and it's just a nice round water washed, looks like river stones, only they're rather small. They're also covered with dust and dirt. Karen and I have found this to be true when we had aquariums, that if you don't wash your aquarium gravel before you put it in the aquarium, you're going to have a really cloudy aquarium. So I take the stone material here out of the plastic bag and put it in a bucket, and then just let the hose run through there for about 15 minutes. And at first the water coming out is all brown, but once the water's coming out clear, I dump the material out on the layout here and let the sun dry it out, and it's ready for use. Next, I'm putting it under the bridge here to figure out where I think this river stone would look best, where I want to have a muddy river bottom, where I want to have just, clean water, and where I want to have this river rock so that it looks natural. As always, the best reference is the real world. Just go out and look at some actual stream beds this way, or get on the internet and just search for that sort of thing. But in really looking at what a riverbed looks like, there's a mixture of these larger river stones and sand. And then, of course, when there's water coming down through here, the sandy stuff would turn rather muddy. So anyway, that's the look that I'm after, is having some of this loose, larger river stone down here. So this is kind of the look I'm after. Where the cliff extends out this way, I want to have that extend out into the pond as just sort of an area of rocks, almost like a sandbar, if you will, extending out into the pond. I wanted to make sure that the edges around the pond were caulked in. I used this latex caulking all over the railroad to keep water from getting down into the wood part of the benchwork and that sort of thing. So the railroad is covered over with roofing material, and then the seams and edges are sealed with caulk, and the sun will dry that out and break it. So I'm periodically I have to come out here and patch the caulk around the edges of the railroad. But I thought to use this same caulk to seal in the pond, around the edges of the pond, as well as building up the berm, the little dam, if you will, that holds the water under the bridge so it doesn't all just run out onto the railroad. I tried to really work the caulk down into the roofing material to try to create as watertight a seal as possible here between the pile of rocks and the pond bottom, which is the roofing material. I was hoping that this would create a more or less watertight seal to keep the water in the pond area. Now, another product I've been using out here on the railroad is this rockite, and it mixes up sort of like a concrete product, sort of like mixing up mortar mix, except that it's a much finer powder, and boy does it dry into a hard, durable substance that really sticks well to everything that it's in contact with. So for the little rock peninsula here, I mixed up a small batch of that and stuck it out in the area of the pond where I wanted the rocks, and then just embedded the rocks into that, thinking that in and around the rocks that would leave a nice kind of gray color and muddy texture that would look really nice. And in fact, it turned out quite nice, I think. And then it also got out along the bottom of the pond in a few areas, and I think that looks really nice too. It really looks like a muddy bottom on the pond. Now, to help ensure that the whole thing's going to be watertight, I added another layer of caulking material along the edge of the berm here, really trying to work that down in and around the rocks and out onto the roofing material to try to create a real watertight seal along the berm. And then I just kind of put some loose rock along there, because it doesn't all have to be anchored down. One of the advantages of working outside is you can have a lot of your material just loose. Now let's test it and put some water in here and see if it's watertight. And in fact, it really isn't all that watertight. It'll hold water for about 15 minutes is all, but it's soaking out under the rock berm here and into the ballast under the track. Not exactly what I had in mind. Again, I'm not that concerned if the water leaks out over time, because I don't want water under here most of the time, but I want it to be able to hold water. If I add water to it, if I dump water under here, I'd like it to stay there for, half hour, 45 minutes while I run trains and take pictures and whatever else. But the fact that it dries out over time doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I want it to. But I do want it to be more watertight than it currently is. So I thought, well, let me mix up another batch of this rockite. You can mix it really thin, and when you do that, you can brush it on with a brush. You have to move quickly, because boy, this stuff dries quickly, and if it dries in your brush, of course, the brush is ruined. But if you move very, very quickly and then quickly wash the brush out before the material dries, the brush will clean out quite nicely. And this is a great way to just put a nice thin mixture of this material out on the railroad. I actually put 2 coatings of this on. The second batch, I added some of my concrete color. I buy these powders for coloring concrete. So I added brown color to the second batch so that it would blend in and form much more of a pleasant looking pond bottom, if you will, and muddy texture on the rocks where it's getting onto the rocks here, like there's mud and moss up there. I quickly washed out my brush, and the brush came out just fine, but I failed to wash the material out of the bowl that I was using for mixing, and it dried in here, and I thought I was never going to be getting it out of here. In spite of the fact this is plastic, and you wouldn't think concrete would stick to plastic, it stuck like crazy on there, and I almost had to throw the bowl away. I finally actually took a chisel to it. I just sort of scraped it out there in the middle, and once it started breaking loose, it came up reasonably well. But had I let this set completely up for a day, I don't think it ever would have come out of there. Now let's add some more color to it. I'm using just these craft paints that you can pick up at the store for $1. And if you let that material get up on the surface of things, the weather will take it right off in a matter of months. But if you are putting it over a concrete product like this, and you really get the paint dilute, and it will soak down into the material, and at that point it's pretty much there permanently. And in areas where it does flake off, a lot of times that just looks really nice. That has a natural quality to it as well. I added a lot of green in here because I wanted this to feel muddy and mossy. So I used mixtures of a couple of different colors of brown and this mossy green color. And then here again, I can just throw some of these loose rocks on top of the whole thing. Everything doesn't have to be anchored down out here. It looks much better if things are on the loose. There's a fair amount of exposed roofing material. I've gotten some of the color paint out onto the roofing material, but basically the bottom of the pond is still just that roofing material. Okay, let's add some water again and see if it holds water. And it still leaks a bit, but again, that's not a problem. It'll hold water for about 45 minutes or so, and over time it all drains out and goes away. But again, that doesn't bother me at all. I think this is exactly what I was after. Looks really nice while the water is in here. You can take pictures and whatever else you want to. And then an hour later when you come over here, the pond is perfectly dry and not going to attract mosquitoes or anything. And as the water is slowly leaking out, it leaves this kind of muddy edge all the way around, which also looks quite natural. So overall, I'm thrilled. Well, the kid in me really wants to wade out into that mud and try to catch some salamanders, so I'm going to call that a success. If you've enjoyed this video, do click on the link at the end, which will take you to the playlist of the entire series of building the bridge on the River Wye here. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink, right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and Karen and I will see you here on Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.